So, Chris, I was just looking through your book, The Wrong Side of 35, and I thought it'd be an interesting topic for conversation about training as an older grappler. So you're at the advanced age of 40, 41 right now?
Just turned 41 a week ago, Stephan.
And how long have you been training?
Jiu-Jitsu has been about 12 years. I've done a bit of judo kind of off and on over that length, but prior to that, I kind of got my start as a freestyle wrestler, Olympic freestyle being the rule set. So collectively, I probably had about 20 plus years from various grappling arts at different points in my life. I only really found jiu-jitsu in my late 20s after my academic career ended and I stopped wrestling. And quite frankly, I got fat and lazy, and then I had to find something else to do. And I just got lucky and stumbled across jiu-jitsu, and that's how it started.
Yeah. It's amazing how wrestling is so restricted to people basically in high school and university. And there's almost no career for it, or certainly participating in it as a sport once you graduate. And maybe you'll coach, and if you're at the Olympic level, maybe you'll compete for a few more years. But for 99.99% of wrestlers, that's it. It's over.
Yeah, there really isn't very much of, at least in Canada. I mean, the US is a bit of a different animal. Wrestling's a much bigger sport there. But in Canada, there's very few private clubs that I've ever stumbled across. Sometimes, like, university athletes will kind of hang on and still use the university facilities and kind of get out and train that way. But you're right. Like, recreationally speaking, it's few and far between, at least as far as I've noticed.
I would argue that the only people, sort of grown-ups, and we'll call that anyone who's graduated from high school or university, who continue to wrestle are MMA fighters who want to improve their wrestling game. They'll go and train at the universities, even though they're not in university. But some dude who's an accountant or repairs cars, they're not trundling up, putting on the singlet and shooting low singles anymore.
Yeah, very true. And actually, I had this conversation with the executive director of Wrestling New Brunswick is a lady by the name of Samantha Stewart. She's also a multiple time Canadian national champion. She's had success internationally, world bronze at the world senior level. And she's obviously pursuing Olympic hopeful dreams, and she's been on the doorstep a number of times, but has never actually got the invitation to the Olympics. She's trained all over the world, and one thing we talked about is like her outside of her athletic career is work as a sport psychologist. And we explored kind of like what happens to those athletes when you make that transition from being an Olympic hopeful or Olympic athlete to once you stop your career and that ceases to be part of your identity. And in many cases, kind of like the crisis, psychological crisis that these athletes have to navigate because before they had an extremely regimented schedule, they knew exactly what they were going to be doing, what they were going to be eating, where they were going to be, who they were training with, etc. They had nutritionists and strength and conditioning specialists and a whole team around them kind of watching everything they were doing. And then one day that just stops. And trying to, reconcile the difference of who you were and who you are. And that's especially, I think, difficult in a sport like wrestling because, as you know, there seems to be very few kind of recreational channels afterwards. And I don't know what the solution is there.
Jiu-jitsu.
Yeah, jujitsu, right? Uh, like by comparison, like jujitsu does seem to have the recreational side really figured out. I mean, I'm proof and point to that. But I don't know why wrestling seems to struggle with that kind of transition towards like you don't have to be a competitor. You don't have to be, grinding to the maximum extent day in and day out to pursue wrestling recreationally. Whereas jiu-jitsu, maybe it attracts the people that naturally gravitate towards that. I don't know.
Well, I think wrestling is harder, and it's hard to wrestle lightly, whereas you can do jiu-jitsu in first or second gear if you want to. You might not win competitions, but you can go roll around with your friends. It's hard to, you know, suplex your friends just a little bit.
Yes, like we talked about, like wrestling is hard miles. And by comparison, like I know, now at 41, like I'm very content with my current training regimen, and I feel very comfortable, even though I do have kind of some nagging injuries and bumps and bruises I picked up along the way. There's nothing that stops me from doing jujitsu. I'm a prime example of this. Like recreationally, I don't go wrestle because I'm concerned my knees and my hips will be able to take it.
I think that to go back a step, that idea of this is something that you've been doing, and this is how you've been walking, living, breathing, eating for 10 years, in high school and then in university, and then that to come to a sudden end is really disorienting for people because it's how they define themselves. I've seen this with MMA fighters as well, right? They're fighting, they're acclaimed. I guess they get the girls really easily. They're flown sometimes all over the world. There's people pumping their tires, and then they stop fighting, and that's it. I mean, a lot of them have no other way of making money. And all of a sudden, unless you're really lucky, the girls quickly forget who you are. And it's a very rough adjustment.
Yeah, certainly be jarring, and in many cases, to your point, like there's not really a retirement plan kind of baked into many athletics, but perhaps more so something like what's traditionally run as a nonprofit, at least in this country. There's very few channels you can go.
So with you personally, going from wrestling then down to jiu-jitsu, down in terms of intensity and down in terms of level, how have you found your athleticism and your physicality to change over that period of time? What can you no longer do that you were able to do back then?
Yeah, well, I mean, I'm from the era, and this is not meant as a knock against any of my coaches. I had phenomenal coaches all throughout my academic career, but like I remember, going back to when I was a student wrestler. I mean, cutting weight for us was a garbage bag. Wearing a garbage bag under our clothes, a few different layers. In a van on a early Saturday morning with the heat cranked going up to Bathurst, New Brunswick. So the sport science elements, the nutrition science elements, weren't as broadly understood, and if they were weren't as widely practiced then. So I think there's a lot of miles, a lot of wear and tear that would have been on my body from the 90s that maybe wouldn't accumulate as fast on current athletes, where the sport science behind that is either better understood.
I think they just push themselves harder. If they find a way to reduce the wear and tear, they're just going to go harder and faster for longer and accumulate the same wear and tear over more hours.
Yeah, it certainly could be, but I just know like there's plenty of movements that would have been elementary to me as a wrestler, like shooting, low singles, low doubles, blast doubles, and I don't move like that anymore. And part of that's just getting older. Like, I have a desk job in my kind of, my regular life. So I'm not as physically active in my 9 to 5 as more physically active careers would be. So I don't move the same way. And I think there's been a lot of, I don't want to say damage, but like, you've had injuries, and like my knees are creaky, my hips are creaky, where my shoulders is kind of a bit janky. But it's kind of the sum total of a lot of years of doing, I guess, difficult things, as opposed to kind of like one traumatic kind of injury or illness. But it's certainly kind of ground down just my general ability to move, and indeed I'm trying to put a lot more focus on mobility as a result of that. And I'm kind of sad to say it's taken me this long to really put that much emphasis on mobility as I probably should have 10 years ago.
What does putting an emphasis on mobility mean in the field?
Yeah, so I'm trying to be much more deliberate on like functional movement patterns in things that I don't do in the course of my regular day. So consciously trying to introduce movements into my day that I wouldn't get from my normal day-to-day life. So I'm currently working on a program from Yoga for BJJ, which is just like it's like a 12-week mobility challenge. So I just started that at the time of recording. So that's an example of trying to be a little more deliberate on that. I'm also trying to be much more conscious to when my body is giving me a signal. So I've had this nagging issue with one of my left quadriceps for a long stretch, and it's at a point now where if I do a squat, under load or even body weight, I can feel a quiver, and I'm starting to feel that quiver kind of in my knee, like in my patella, almost like a twisting sensation. And I'm starting to get the sensation that my knee is reacting to the fact that my leg is overcompensating for a contracted quadricep that just isn't letting go. So I'm trying to be a little more honest with myself about, like, I probably have to spend a little more time on the foam roller, the massage therapy, whatever it is, just to kind of work that stuff through. But it's really about like trying to recognize that in my day job, because I spend so much time sitting or standing and not moving, is trying to introduce the movement patterns from play as opposed to just what would naturally happen if I was performing the functions of my day job.
Well, you've mentioned your day job, and that's a very analytical job focusing on numbers. And in your book, you talk about this idea of measuring progress. And I totally agree that what can be measured can be improved. Like that's one of my fundamental realizations when it comes to things like nutrition or training. But how do you measure jiu-jitsu progress? It's pretty easy to say, I want to drink 3 liters of water in the summer. And if I'm training hard, it's got to be 4 liters of water. And you get a 4 liter water jug. And if it's not empty at the end of the day, you're done screwed up. That's pretty easy. But how do you quantify and measure jiu-jitsu progress? It's a lot more amorphous.
Yes, it's a great point because there's, insofar as possible, I prefer objective measurements. But when you have a subjective thing like jiu-jitsu, and why I say subjective is, you and I may feel differently about our skill or caliber, competence in any one kind of element of that, but also because jiu-jitsu is performed in relation to another party. The stimulus you are receiving, the actions that you have to react to from your opponent or your training partner can always differ. So you may be doing everything correctly. It's just your partner has done something a little bit better or timed it a little bit better to cause your technique, your movement to be less efficient than maybe it would have otherwise been had the stimulus been different. So it's tough to get objective measurements on everything. I do think there's still some value to subjectivity. Like if you just feel like you had a good day on the mats, like that's positive. I also know that just in general, the more you go, the better you will get at any pursuit. So whether it's doing chin-ups or it's running ultra marathons or it's jiu-jitsu or judo or what have you, just time on the mat, time spent doing the activity will translate to improvement. I try to be really conscious to as opposed to where I feel good is where I feel bad. And if I'm getting, consistently submitted or stuck in one particular position, like I'd like to go in with a conscious approach and say, I'm going to start every round in bottom mount. And I'm just going to keep getting smashed until I start finding some success in escaping or whatever the victory condition happens to be. And even though that's still a little bit subjective because you're receiving, an amorphous stimulus from your training partner, you can still get an objective sense for, are you getting better? Are you more survivable as opposed to getting submitted 5 times? Are you getting submitted twice? So it's tough to give like a blanket kind of answer to that, but I think it's trying to identify where are the areas where you feel good or you feel bad and how you double down or improve depending on the criteria.
I suppose one objective measurement, if you're training with the same people all the time, and we all do this, is like, how many times did I sweep you versus you sweeping me? How many times did I submit you versus you submitting me? Assuming that we're roughly at the same level and we have these back and forth battles. And then, people go through the usual things. If I have to take a month off because of an injury or whatever, I'm in final exams and I come back and you destroy me, right? I got no sweeps in on you and you swept me 10 times and submitted me 5. That's a number that I'm going to go home with and stew about. So that is a way to quantify it. Of course, it depends on, is the other guy training? Are you training? But if you're training with this same group of people, then it is a way to get sort of objective, semi-objective feedback from the universe as to, are you doing something right or are you doing something wrong?
Yeah, it's one thing I really appreciate about martial arts and perhaps jiu-jitsu in particular is the sensation we're all climbing the same mountain together, but we're going to find different points along our journeys where like you may hit a plateau at a different point than I do, even though we trained the exact same number of days for the same amount of time, the same amount of intensity. There's going to be things that are just natural. I want to say impediments, but just natural things where like we hit a little bit of a block that we have to overcome. And some of that's body mechanics, some of that's personality, some of that is just the way I choose to express jujitsu in relation to whoever my partner or opponent is. But trying to find ways to take the subjective insofar as possible and give yourself an objective measurement, I think is generally a good call. But I also recognize like sometimes it's okay to have a subjective measurement. Like, look, I feel happy today. I felt like I had a good class. If you feel like you had a good class more often than not, like that's probably true. Maybe it's not as crystal clear as far as like, making yourself a checklist and ticking off like all the areas where you could be improving and so on, but it still is to some extent, there's some value in that feedback.
You mentioned plateau. So when's the last plateau that you had and how did you break it?
Oh, one of my um, good friends and training partners has he's a judo black belt, purple belt in jiu-jitsu, but he's just he works on the railway, so he's just like a stocky, strong guy. And if he is successful at passing my guard and getting into north south, I have a very very hard time preventing the kind of standard Kimura attack from there. At a point where I just saying like, look, Bob, like you got to do this to me every day we're in class together until I can find a way to stop that. And I'm not at all ashamed to admit, because he's a very tough guy, that's taken me quite a bit of time to reliably defend that attack. Yeah, so I think that's a very specific example. I feel like I haven't been able to defend that one attack from that one body type, but it's really stuck with me. Another thing just generally is like I'm a pretty small guy, so I've never weighed more than 160 pounds in my life. I was scared when I had the brown belt tied around me, because at that stage I kind of felt like, okay, now there's really a bullseye on my back, and it's not the fun purple belt where you get to kind of goof around and kind of explore your space. Like now you got to really kind of double down and I would say take it serious, but like again, there's a certain, and maybe I'm the only one who feels that way, but there's a certain heat that I felt when the brown belt was on me, and feeling like you're getting stuck on the back and spending a lot of time on your back as a small guy, and most of my training partners are much bigger than me. It's trying to find that the nebulous feeling comfortable in a bad situation, because it always creeps back in after a while. If somebody else kind of overcomes their plateau and they're capable of pinning me down and holding me down, then I got to find a new solution to kind of escape or regard or improve my position, whatever it is. And I think it's kind of a constant evolution. I think life is just a series of plateaus. So I guess in a roundabout way, it's kind of hard to pick a specific one, because it seems like I'm always heading into another one.
I think that is the nature of it. It's not a linear progression, it's a stepwise progression. And sometimes it's even, you go backwards, which is, I think, less frustrating than a plateau. Like if all of a sudden my skill level, I have a really bad day on the mats, I'm like, okay, there's probably a reason. And then I can usually find the reason. Oh, I'm fighting off a virus. I had a terrible night's sleep. I am overtrained. I am undertrained. I am so distracted right now. And those dips tend to last less long than plateaus. Plateaus are actually much more frustrating because it just goes on and on and on. And I think you really have to change something up in your training at that point, because something that was working before has stopped working. Maybe you're making great progress only sparring or only drilling or only doing something, to oversimplify your approach. And then you hit this plateau and you were improving with that training methodology, but you're not improving anymore. So let's mix up the training methodology and see if that breaks you through.
Yeah, I think varying the stimulus is tried and true, and indeed, you look at somebody who has only ever done the same lifts or the same two-handed kettlebell swing. It's the only thing they ever do. Like there's a point you can if you've never done any exercise, like you'll make ground pretty quickly. But if you only exert yourself to the same stimulus over and over again, like eventually you're going to see diminishing returns. So I think it is important to kind of mix that up and do some different things. For exactly that reason is aside from the actual importance of kind of getting the stimulus and kind of growing at that, but it's also boredom. I mean, if you're not feeling interested in those lifts or interested in going to class because you're doing the same thing day in and day out, like you're likely going to lose steam. It's actually a good quote from James Clear in the book Atomic Habits. He said the greatest threat to success isn't failure, it's boredom.
I would agree. And in the years since I became a black belt, and this is true before black belt as well, but definitely true after, I've really taken my training and I tend to focus obsessively on one area for a month to 6 months to sometimes even a year. And I I tend to move on to a new area when I feel like the rate of return, reaching that point of diminishing returns. And also, I guess, when I'm getting bored of it. It was like studying for exams in university. I knew I was going to do well when I was really bored with the material. It wasn't that I don't know the material. It's like, oh God, here we go again. That is a point where I knew, okay, I'm good to go. Let's write this exam and we'll do well now.
Yeah, and go find the next challenge to work on.
So you talked about kind of this idea of the bullseye on the back after promotion. And I would argue that that's a double-edged sword. Say getting your brown belt, you kind of feel the need to represent. At the same time, everyone's gunning for you. So you want to tighten up your game. On the other hand, you're like, there's no way I'm going to try something new, because trying something new means I'm going to get smashed. So it kind of limits your game, and your ego can get in the way of developing something new at that point, because you're worried about looking silly.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. Like one of the lessons I think I've struggled with a lot in the earlier stage of my jiu-jitsu career was um, not always falling back to my A game.
What was your A game?
Well, I mean, I like playing. I mean, I spend a lot of time on my back because again, I'm a smaller guy, so I really like playing half guard and knee shield. Were kind of like my two. I felt the most comfortable in those positions. But especially true, like if you're going and traveling and you're going into a different gym where you don't know anybody, like you're far more likely to fall into your A game because it's where you're comfortable. So trying to be deliberate about not always going there, and if you feel pressured, like accept the fact that you're losing the round, but don't just go back to where it's comfortable, because that will deliberately limit your opportunities to express and explore new movement patterns and new techniques and new applications of those techniques. So it's something I know I was probably more guilty of that than most. I'm going to blame it on the fact that I'm a small guy. The reality is, like, I know that especially whenever I felt like I really hit those plateaus, I bet you if you went and kind of black boxed everything, you would find that those plateaus came around periods where I spent too much time playing my A game, as opposed to being willing to get tapped and get swept and trying different things.
It's so funny to hear a wrestler talk about half guard as his A game. Was that because you would wrestle up from the half guard? Was taking the back and getting onto your knees your A game from half guard?
Well, so it's funny because when I first started, like my first few classes, of course, like again, being young and ignorant, I was in my 20s at that stage. I figured, oh, I wrestled for a lot of years, like I'm going to be capable at least of like maintaining top position, and even if a guy is a bit bigger than me, like I felt comfortable that I'd be able to kind of exert some pressure and kind of play some of my game, and could not have been more wrong. Getting swept repeatedly and just put into positions where, again, as a wrestler, like being flat on your back is the absolute worst possible outcome. Whether it's freestyle, folk style, or Greco, like that is the worst possible outcome. And that quickly had to become where I was the most comfortable. But it was very difficult to kind of rewire that. And it took a long time to kind of just be comfortable fighting off my back. But I think I developed it out of necessity, not because of it was a desire. Again, like I like the takedown game, I like the clinch game, but the reality is, like, I wind up in many cases being bench pressed from from some of the guys I train with. So the simple reality is, I have to accept the fact that I can hold on for dear life and potentially risk injury for myself, or I can just concede the sweep and try to get to a place where I'm comfortable being half guard, knee shield, and playing from there.
I want to talk about this becoming comfortable on your back, going from being a wrestler where you're not comfortable on your back to jiu-jitsu where you are comfortable on your back, kind of as a placeholder for people becoming comfortable with any area that they're currently uncomfortable with. So what were the tricks that you used to become comfortable in a new area? We'll talk specifically about being on your back, but I think this would apply to anything. If becoming comfortable using pressure passing, becoming comfortable using spider guard, becoming comfortable with a submission you're not very good at, the kimura, the omoplata, the whatever.
Yeah, I think probably the key to it was just being honest with myself that this was going to be my lot in life. So repeated exposure to the stimulus was going to be where I knew I was going to be there. So as opposed to killing myself and burning too many calories trying to escape against somebody who was bigger and more skilled than me, it was just accepting the fact that this is where you are going to live your life for the next while. And throughout the course of me being a white belt, so the 2.5 years it took me to progress to blue, I mean that's where I lived. I spent very little time on top. And I think because of that, I just got more comfortable in that space, and I became more competent at sweeping or submitting from my back, and that persisted through my blue belt days. And purple belt, I started to feel like I had a bit more of a command, so I started to play around a bit more. Again, my comment earlier about like I kind of wish I was more accepting of my shortcomings and not always resulting to my A game, because I probably got a little bit pinioned. My style got kind of pinned in to kind of playing that area where, again, it was being imposed on me. But at a certain point, I just got so used to it being imposed on me that that became my kind of comfort zone.
Okay.
So I think it's honesty. It's being kind of deliberate and recognizing, like, wherever you're going to be stuck, or wherever you're going to be kind of finding your way to express your jujitsu and developing the skills that you are lacking. If I was having a miserable time hitting sweeps, if somebody would kind of say they stood up trying to pass my guard or something, if I was having a hard time stopping that pass or a smash pass, whatever it was just kind of troubleshooting where are the areas that like I'm comfortable here, but I still have many flaws. So where are the areas that are more flawed than others? So I think honesty is probably the best answer to that, and self-reflection.
I guess we'll steal the physicist Richard Feynman's quote about the first principle is that you must not fool yourself, and that you are the easiest person to fool. So in jiu-jitsu, you must not fool yourself, and remember that you are the easiest person to fool.
Yeah, well, I mean, I continue to get fooled regularly, Stephan. So
Well, none of us are immune, but the option is to become a little bit more immune, or the, the hope or the goal is to become a little bit more immune to fooling yourself. Let's focus on training as an older grappler. One might say training on the wrong side of 35. So what are you doing differently to enable training effectively after age 35?
multifaceted. The truth is, a lot of things I find that work for me that maybe are more or less appealing to others, but you have to take a much more deliberate approach to recovery. So whether that's massage therapy or foam rolling or hot cold therapy, breath work, like I find all these things have helped me.
How often are you doing those things? Like let's make it concrete. When was the last
Sure.
time you went to get massage therapy?
Last week.
Okay.
So it probably, like, now again, I mentioned I am dealing with kind of that nagging kind of quadricep issue. So I'm probably seeing a massage therapist like every 3 to 4 weeks right now, trying to get that finally resolved. As far as like hot cold therapy, I'm a cold shower guy. I mean, a cold shower, say, every day. I'm cold plunge less frequent. I just don't have a good rig for that at the house. I like cold in general. I know my diet is far less forgiving now than when I was in my 20s. Like I can tell you if I step onto the mats at the academy, if I've gone the chips and wine route the night before, my gas tank is not what it is if I have a nice piece of salmon and a salad. So the diet is certainly a much bigger influence. I think a big part of it too is, like, I talk a lot about, and I ask a lot of people about their thoughts on the differences between intensity and consistency. And there's a place for intensity, but I myself try to reserve that for if I have a teammate who is preparing for a fight or preparing for a tournament or whatever it is. I'll try to keep that in the tank to help them prepare, and rely on more kind of consistent, flowy, expressive roles in my kind of, call it the day-to-day training. Just because I know now that if I do wind up taking an injury somehow, I'm probably not going to bounce back in 3 or 4 days the way maybe I would have 20 years ago. So for me, I'd rather train with a bit less intensity while I'm at the academy, but be able to get to the academy without missing any days. So, and again, that's a big part of that too, is having the right training partners and knowing what each other are looking for.
And avoiding the bad training partners.
Yes, thankfully, like our that certainly is an issue. I think in the ether, I think our academy, we're really blessed there. We don't have any kind of goons. No, we do have some people that maybe roll a little bit more energetic than somebody like me is always prepared for. But it's always in good nature. There's no ill intent. We've got a really good group at MXT West, and like, I couldn't be happier with the training environment.
I think the recovery thing is the number one thing. And your ability is, we're not the first people to talk about this, but your ability to recover goes way down as you get older. And your ability to put up with bad decisions goes way down. I mean, there's a lot of drinking that goes on in university, and people still manage to get up and go train the next day, go to class the next day, and kind of fake their way through it. People who either continue that lifestyle or start that lifestyle in their 30s and 40s, man, does it ever show so much more. I do wonder how much of that is just the effect of alcohol on sleep. I don't drink at all, but everybody that I know who drinks and tracks their sleep says it's undeniable. One drink in the evening, their sleep score goes down for the same length of time they sleep. And if they're not sleeping as well, they're just not recovering as well. I do wonder to what extent the negative effect of drinking on training is just the effect of drinking on sleep.
Yeah, it's a great question. I think there's an element too where there's like a compounding effect to this. So to your point about like in your late teens and your low 20s, like your body's probably far more forgiving of the late night pizza, the beer, and that kind of stuff. I can't do that anymore. My guilty vices, however, though, I love a glass of wine with a book. I love to sit and read and enjoy a glass of wine. But the problem is, very seldom do I open a bottle of wine and not finish it.
Mm.
So I'd like to, I'll get lost in a book and I'll sit for a few hours and I'll finish the bottle and it's like, oh, geez, it's 10 o'clock. It's past my bedtime. But that's kind of thing. Like I've recognized that about myself. So I have had to dramatically cut down, like wine or any kind of alcohol for that matter, but it's primarily wine, for exactly that reason. I had a fellow on my own podcast, Dr. Jonathan Charay, who's a sleep doctor. He's spent years as a director at the Center for Human Performance as a sleep specialist. And I picked his brain about these kind of topics. And he did say that alcohol will disrupt deep sleep, but not light sleep. And the inverse is true for cannabis. He's saying if you take like an edible, your
So
light sleep.
of course, what people are going to be doing here. I got to get drunk and stoned at the same time.
Yeah, you're going to the Matrix. You take both pills, right? You get the red and the blue.
Tell me that's not what.
Yeah, that wasn't the clinical recommendation. No, but it is interesting to see that like there's certainly a mountain of clinical evidence that would reinforce that is alcohol in any degree will have some negative influence on your sleep. And of course, again, when you're say boys our age, Stefan, sleep is valuable. And you add on things like busy lifestyle. You have if you have a family, spouse or children, like all these things pull your time and focus and you need to have energy to accomplish a lot in your day. In jiu-jitsu or martial arts in general, like that's a high calorie intensity burning. Even if you're rolling light, you're still gonna get to burn a lot of calories. So you got to make sure you have enough gas in the tank to accomplish all the things that you want to accomplish or you need to accomplish. And being deliberate about your recovery and deliberate about like the other side of this is obviously, let's say, answer preparations with the pound of cure.
Proper preparation and planning prevents piss poor performance.
There you go.
Similar, same thing.
Yeah, same concept. So trying to think about like again, like I'm trying to be more proactive with. Like, I'm dealing with a reactive injury right now, a reactive issue, but I'm trying to be more proactive.
So what does that mean? What does being proactive around an injury, around your specific injury mean? What are you specifically doing different?
Well, I mean, there's a fair degree of study that would suggest that like issues around your joints and ligaments and tendons, like if you lift under load, you can strengthen those types of tissues. And so if you don't lift under load, you can still strengthen them, but not to the same degree. So like right now, I'm dealing with something in my leg that I'm trying to resolve. But the mobility program I'm working on is total body. So I have one issue, one kind of acute issue I'm trying to resolve, but I'm trying to be more broad based. Again, I want to give myself an opportunity to not be injured in the first place or to deliberately try to improve the quality of my sleep or the quality of my fueling, nutrition, conditioning, whatever it is, as opposed to waiting for the point where like, you cross the threshold and it's like, crap, now I have to fix things. I'm trying to be more proactive and trying stop being hurt in the first place, or recognize the behaviors that would be counterproductive towards the things that I really want to accomplish in my life.
I think one of the problems with dealing with an injury, say your hip knee issue, but it really applies to anything, is you have to hit it with a broad spectrum of treatments because diagnosis is so difficult. If you were to go to a chiropractor, I'm pretty sure the chiropractor would tell you that somehow your hip issue is because of your spinal alignment. And guess what? He can fix your spinal alignment. If you go to a massage therapist, they're going to tell you that XYZ muscle is tight and you've got to go and get more massage on that muscle. If you went to a cranial sacral therapist, they're going to tell you that the way you're holding your head is the reason that your hip is hurting. And every specialist and expert, I'm putting air quotes here for the people who are listening in audio format, is going to diagnose the problem as being caused by something that only they can fix. So I remember trying to chase down knee pain years ago, and I went to a chiropractor and they told me it was my spine. I went to a physiotherapist. They told me there was a strength imbalance. I finally went to a sports medicine doctor and he goes, "Oh, you got IT band syndrome, use insoles," and the pain went away instantly. But I would have never known what solution worked if I hadn't tried all of them. Because that was also when I had a bad back, I must have tried 20 different modalities. Eventually, I found one that worked for me for that problem and has worked repeatedly. But man, that initial diagnosis is so difficult to get.
Yeah, 100%. Anything that's not kind of surface level and visible is very, very challenging. Of course, everybody is going to approach a problem from the frames of their own reference. So it's not the chiropractor's fault that they're trying to identify things based on what their frame of reference, what their education is. But it's just it's naturally where you would gravitate to. It's where your training is. It's you try to just line up symptoms to treatments from your own frame of reference as much as possible. But there is an element to, like, I think because I was, I say an athlete with air quotes for those who are listening on audio format for so long. Like I have a pretty good sense of how my body feels. And there's times where I know it's like, oof, that's an issue with the rotator cuff. That's, tendon. That's whatever it is. Or I took a calf slicer and my muscle is sore or whatever it is. Like, you have some kind of command based on familiarity with your own kind of biomechanics. But 100%, like, I'm working with RMT and foam rolling and massage guns on this quadricep. And to your point, my RMT did kind of discouraged acupuncture. But so if I don't get relief on this in the next, kind of 2-3 treatment sessions, like, I probably will explore things that I know very little about, like dry needling or acupuncture for this particular issue. And maybe it'll work, maybe it won't. I have no doubt the acupuncturist will tell me that it will when they prescribe the treatment. But
100%. They will tell you that. Yeah, man, if there was ever a case for the placebo effect working, it would have been me with acupuncture because, I spent 5 to 10 years doing Kung Fu and idolizing Chinese culture and embracing this whole idea of, yes, the Chinese traditions, they know many things that modern Western medicine doesn't. So I was perfectly primed to go get acupuncture and have it work for me because of the placebo effect. But then I probably went to see, I should add it up, but probably had 40 different acupuncture sessions by 15 different practitioners for a host of different issues. And never once did it help, not once, not even a tiny bit. So not only was every condition I had, which is mostly musculoskeletal, resistant to acupuncture, it was also resistant to the placebo effect around acupuncture. So yeah, good luck with acupuncture is all I'm saying.
Well, so isn't it funny, again, talking about this frame of reference thing, because you were conditioned, had an appreciation for the culture. You had this natural belief that acupuncture could be the panacea for this. But so that frame of reference creeps into everything. And again, I think it's just about kind of, in many things in life, is about being objective, taking a step back and recognizing when we are too anchored to any one given thing.
Well, I'm biased now, but I will say that if you don't get this hip knee issue resolved, go see a sports medicine guy. And your GP in this case is just a gatekeeper to get you to see the real specialist. Have you pursued the sports medicine route on this?
Well, not yet, but one thing I will say is, and I'm probably going to feel guilty saying it, but because of what I do professionally, like I do know a lot of physicians. So the nice thing there is, like in many cases, it's a casual conversation as opposed to me having to make an appointment. And there are some challenges in the healthcare system for getting a line into specialists, so it can be difficult. But
It takes quite a while sometimes.
yeah, depending on the severity, and yeah, they're probably going to be a little bit, let's just say, less in a rush to help a 41-year-old jiu-jitsu guy with a muscle injury than somebody who may be a little bit more.
Can't do spider guard anymore. You don't realize that this is really important.
Yeah, well, spider guard's not part of my regimen, because again, as a short guy, you put the plant the feet in the bicep, someone just stands up and I'm off the mat.
Fair enough. But yeah, I recognize that your emergency is not necessarily their emergency.
And rightly so.
Okay, so we've talked about changes to recovery, to some extent, the emphasis on nutrition and rest and not screwing those things up. What about technical changes as you've gotten older and want to stay semi-competitive as a semi-athlete?
Yeah. I think a big part of that is, again, kind of going back to the comments about like knowing my body a bit more. Like I know, generally speaking, if I'm in a situation where I can fight through a submission, or if I'm truly in danger and I got a tap. Like my ego is, I like to think, not as big of an impediment to my growth now as it was 5, 10 years ago. So being more, I want to say, like, okay with losing a round, but being more conscious to the fact of, like, I'm not getting paid for this. I have many other things in pursuits in life that are, valuable to me in varying degrees in relation to jujitsu, which is a very, very high priority in my life.
Being able to shoulder check as you're changing lanes is also important.
Exactly.
Uh,
But I know if I'm caught in an inside heel hook, and like what am I going to prove if I kind of hold that too long? If I feel like I can escape and I'm pretty comfortable, like okay, but if I feel any kind of sense of danger, like I've got kids I've got to get to school and play with, and so it's I guess understanding and kind of hierarchy kind of rating priorities. So I still like the hard rounds, but I like the hard rounds with people I know that can give me a hard round without blowing my ACL. So a lot of it has to do with knowing myself and knowing my training partners, and just knowing where I'm going to draw the limit, because I want to be, and before, number one priority anytime I go into the academy is I want to make sure I can go back to the academy tomorrow.
100%. I think that's probably the guiding principle. And people talk about how, maybe for young guys, it's okay to, fight their way out of a heel hook or try and heel slip their way out of a late stage reverse heel hook. And I can't, because I got to pick up my kids. I got to go get groceries. You know what? Those guys who are living for competing, if they tear their ACL, they're going to be out for half a year. And a half a year without competing is really going to put a crimp in their progress. So it applies to them too. It's just there's much more ego at that level. And I grant you that you have to practice more in the late stage defense area. And maybe there's an argument for sucking up damage in the Mundial finals or in your big match at 1FC or in CJR or whatever. Maybe. But in training, man, you're caught. Like it doesn't matter if you're a professional with kids who needs to carry groceries or you're a 20-year-old punk living at home in your mom's basement training 3 times a day. Having your ACL torn is going to screw up whatever you're doing, regardless of which end of that spectrum you're on.
Yeah, that program's going to get derailed. Yeah, whatever it is.
So what inspired you to write this book?
Oh, so as we talked about just prior to kind of hopping on camera together, Stephan, is I've always enjoyed writing, and I largely attribute that to my parents. And my mother was an English teacher, so I was exposed to I was exposed and encouraged to write and read a lot growing up. Now I tried my hand at writing fiction, and I kind of just found myself at a point, kind of looking back. I'm not sure the day that it happened so much as exactly what the catalyst was, but I just started to wonder, what is it that I've really learned over the course of wrestling and judo and jiu-jitsu as a hobbyist. I say I was competitive as a wrestler, but I was never, anything special. I was never nationally ranked. I never competed internationally. I found jiu-jitsu in my late 20s. Again, I wrote the book when I just got the brown belt promotion. So I was probably 8-9 years into my jiu-jitsu journey at that stage. And it was more about trying to really black box what exactly has martial arts taught me or provided me over the course of those years. How has it influenced my life outside of the academy or the wrestling club or whatever it was? And was it worth it? Like, so, you do accumulate some hard miles and bumps and bruises and nagging injuries. And, it is more kind of an exercise in self-reflection about just what exactly have those experiences meant to me. And there's lots of stuff out there. There's all kinds of great material from martial artists from all different walks of life and different martial arts backgrounds, different sports. But from my experience, largely they're written from called a celebrity athlete or a multi-time world champion, somebody with a pedigree. And those are great and they're inspiring reads. Nothing wrong with
Or
them.
ghost written for those
Or
world
ghostwritten,
champions.
right? But there wasn't very much, I think, that kind of just celebrated kind of the every man, every woman, just the regular person experience in martial arts. And I think it's far too often people might be trapped in the belief that you have to be a competitor, you have to be a world champion, you have to be a medalist, you have to be whatever you fit in this box to get the most out of martial arts. And from my experience, like it's the inverse is true. I think broad writ, everybody can benefit from some exposure to some martial arts. For me, maybe it's jiu-jitsu and wrestling. For somebody else, it could be Muay Thai or who knows. But there's a lot out there that I think provides value to people in almost all aspects of their lives, be it physical, spiritual, mental, what have you. And very seldom is that told, I think, from the lens of just kind of your regular guy or gal. So, it's again, like I think I try to be pretty irreverent in the book and just saying, look, I'm nobody special. This is what my journey's meant to me. And hopefully if you've done martial arts before, it resonates with you. And there's some things in there that you kind of pick up on and say, yep, I can, maybe the exact experience is different, but you kind of get the gist of it. Or conversely, if you're somebody who's been an appreciator of martial arts, but have never actually gotten out there and tried it, it's hopefully gets you some indication of the value that I have found in the hopes that you would find similar value and then go seek that value. Or the last piece of that is somebody who's been doing martial arts for an appreciable length of time, who's thinking of kind of hanging it up. Maybe we just need a reminder of all the good things that are out there because maybe you're having a hard time seeing it for whatever reason. It's kind of a really broad answer to the question, Stephan, but it was more just I wanted to answer for myself. What have martial arts meant to me, and was it worth it?
You denigrate yourself. You're just some guy who can write and writes very well. So that's the difference. I've read lots of books written by very famous people, and if they weren't ghost written or now written by AI, then they're terribly written. So you can write, and I think you convey your thoughts and your lessons very well. So just to take us out, what do you think the biggest lesson from martial arts training and all the different formats was for you in terms of how you apply it to the rest of your life?
Oh, geez. There's a reason why I wrote a book on this subject. Is because it's hard to hard to pick just like kind of one big lesson. I guess the one that maybe has been the most meaningful to me. I mean, and not to say everybody's journey is hyper individualistic. So your experience may very well differ from mine. Overall, it's trying to find a way to be more comfortable in uncomfortable situations. And the reason why I picked that one specifically is because I like to think that jiu-jitsu has made me a better person in general. I think it's made me a better husband. I think it's made me a better father. I think it's made me a better colleague. I think it has allowed me to think about, in many cases, kind of physical stimulus, being in a bad position, getting smothered, getting choked, whatever it is. But like finding like the things that I previously thought were my limits or than my limitations. I think now after these years on the mats, I realize those limitations are much further away from me than where I would have thought they were at the outset. So through the combined, like realizing I can go further, I can work harder, I can remain calm in really challenging situations. I think it's allowed me a little bit more of an opportunity to kind of take a breath when things are really tough, and really assess the problem and really figure out consciously, how should I respond to this? Not how do I want to respond to the stimulus, but how should I respond to the stimulus? So I think that would be the big one. That's a tough question, man.
Yeah. And if I asked you tomorrow, you might have a different answer too.
It's very true, very true. Like I think like one of the most under celebrated things about martial arts in general is community, and that's why I hope for anybody who's out there who has contemplated martial arts, be it jiu-jitsu or kickboxing or what have you, that hasn't done it yet. Yeah, I hope anybody who is sitting on the fence or staying on the couch because they're concerned they won't be welcome would really hopefully take my word for it. There is a community out there that is more than excited to welcome you to the mats.
It may not be the first school that you visit, but it could be the second or the third. You will find a place that is a match for you and your personality. And I think this idea of community is incredibly important. When you take a look at people going through adversity together, it builds bonds that are much stronger than just, I don't know, interacting with people in a normal way. And there's a sense in which something like jiu-jitsu, you are creating this artificial adversity, right? You don't have to be trying to fight for top position against some guy who's desperately trying to keep you down and apply an armbar. That's an optional adversity, and it's kind of an artificial thing. But by struggling together, even struggling against each other, you do create community in a sense, in a way that's very hard to create in other things. The only thing I can really compare it to is what happens to a firefighting crew after a difficult call, after a difficult house fire, after a difficult auto extrication. It really does create this crew unity and these connections that will outlast the experience itself, and perhaps even outlast your career as a firefighter or your career as a grappler. There are people I know who've stopped doing jiu-jitsu 15 years ago who are still some of my best friends. How did they become my best friends? By trying to choke the crap out of each other.
Yeah, so it's very true. People who are dealing with highly stressful or traumatic experiences often form those bonds. I think especially like perhaps more so now than at any point in human history. One, society seems extremely tribal and hard divisions across a money, what's political spectrum or whatever it is. And I know we're not going to get into that, but like there seems to be an awful lot of like kind of deep seated lines between certain things. I'm basically the last generation before social media was a thing. Like I didn't grow up with social media, and like I remember when the internet was first introduced to the consuming public. I've seen statistics that would say like in 2004, 69% of Americans would have said they had at least three close friends. And in 2024, the answer is closer to 19% of Americans say they have three close friends. Like everywhere we look, there seems to be division. There seems to be like an insular kind of movement. We were far too comfortable with our 21st century creature comforts and social media, and not needing to leave our house and go to church or community or whatever that means to you. And I think it's a huge loss societally. And when it comes to as jujitsu or martial arts in general, like I think that can in many cases I don't say take the place of, but it provides the environment where you can explore that and get that back into your life. And if you're somebody who is missing that, and again, listen, there's lots of ways you can find it. I don't encourage people to, go to difficult house fire calls. I think that something I wouldn't recommend for the average public, but this is a mechanism or a medium where you can go and find some degree of that, I think, sense of community that is missing broad writ societally, and really, really improve your life. And so that's why I say I think community is under celebrated. It seems everybody talks about like, oh, jiu-jitsu is a great workout. It's a stress reliever. I get fit, whatever. And even some people say like, well, I get to see my friends, and that's great. But like, I think that I don't want to say cheapens it, but like it's a very cursory explanation of the deeper fabric of community that is part of martial arts. And like, yes, maybe for the most part, you see your buddies at the gym, you try to choke each other. Maybe that's like the high level summary of that. But I think there really is something much deeper at work. And that's really important for our souls, like spiritually.
Well, as one guy on the internet speaking to another guy on the internet, dunking on the internet, I completely agree. And so, where on the internet can people find your book?
Yeah, thanks. My website is www.thewrongsideof35.com. That's where kind of the whole project is. So you can see the blogs and all the previous podcast episodes. Of course, Stephan, you were previously a guest of mine, so I thank you for the opportunity to kind of come and be the one answering questions. Usually, I'm the one asking questions, so it's kind of different being on this side of the lens today. So www.thewrongsideof35.com, or social media. It's basically at the wrong side of 35, and say it's kind of a relatively new project. Looking forward to engaging and meeting with as many interesting people as I can, and one thing I love about people in general is the stories. So that I love hearing stories and reading stories and just learning about what else is out there that's I have not experienced from my frame of reference. So life's a big, beautiful thing, and I like to be exposed to it as much as I can.
Awesome, Chris. Well, good luck with your project and good luck with your training and good luck with everything.
Yeah, you as well, Stephan. I wish you every success and happiness for 2025 and beyond.